My dear friends, welcome to ZENPod once again. I hope you are all doing well. Today in the studios we have Tim Coby, the legendary architect who came up with Apple Retail. Tim was hired by Steve Jobs of Apple to design the first ever retail store, and the rest is history. Tim is a design leader, an author and founder of the globally recognized strategic and experience design firm 8 Inc. For over 30 years in design and a leader in innovation and branded experience, 8 Inc. has worked with companies such as Apple, Virgin Atlantic Airways, Nike, Coke, Knoll and Citibank. The firm takes on an interdisciplinary and holistic approach, working across traditional disciplines including strategy, architecture, exhibition, interior design, product, communications and branding. Many of Tim's projects have received international design awards and have been published across Asia, Europe and the United States. His 11 studios and 200 plus strategic designers and business creatives connect across 7 time zones and 3 continents. Graduating with an honors in environmental design from Art Center College of Design, Pasadena in 1982, Coby is now a trustee at his alma mater and serves as chairman of the Academic Affairs Committee. Prior to founding 8 Inc. in 1989, Coby became a founding partner in West Office Design Associates, focusing on museum and exhibition design, and was responsible for the master planning of museums and for several science museum exhibitions globally. He has also worked with Herb Rosenthal and Associates, the American Broadcasting Company, among others. Coby serves on the board of directors for the Grabhorn Institute in San Francisco and is part of the Design Master Plan Committee chaired by the Economic Development Board in Singapore. Tim frequently lectures and works with students at universities including Art Center College of Design, California College of Arts and Crafts, the San Francisco Academy of Art INSEAD, National University of Singapore, and Temasek Polytechnic School of Design. Coby is a keynote speaker and speaks on topics surrounding design, innovation, technology, and business valuation for many internationally known firms. He has been featured and recognized for his work in prominent publications like the Harvard Business Review, Bloomberg, The Economist, Dezeen and Fast Company. His upcoming book, Return on Experience, will be published soon in 2020. It gives me great pleasure once again to welcome Tim Coby to our studios, and I look forward to an enlightening discussion on design and other related elements. Welcome, Tim, and thank you very much. Tim, my trademark first question. Your take on spirituality.
It's an interesting question. I haven't been asked this in most of my design-related discussions, so it's actually quite nice to hear. I guess to me, spirituality is obviously a very personal thing. That it's I tend to think of it differently, maybe than religions, or at least organized religions. I've had an opportunity through my early part of my career to read most of the volumes of documentation on different religions, as I had an exhibition that I worked on around that. But to me, my personal background, my grandmother came from Ireland. She was a very devout Catholic lady and had done what she's asked to do within the religion, which is send her grandchildren every Saturday to catechism and Sunday to mass and those things. And when she passed away, my father came to us, and for us to get to the place where the church was, took us about 45 minutes each way. Okay. So he came to us after my grandmother passed away and said, if you guys want to keep going to church, you can, he said, but you can go up on the top of the hill. We lived on a big mountain and lots of trees and stuff. And he said, you can go up and sit under the pine trees and be as close to God there as you will be in the church.
Beautiful.
And at that time, I didn't recognize it as being as poetic as it turned out to be. I was just happy I could play baseball on the weekend at that point when I was a kid. So that was basically the introduction to this notion of spirituality. And I've always sort of followed those things that he taught that I feel are fundamentally foundation to the way we need to behave, both personally as well as with one another.
What does design mean to you, Tim?
This is a long answer, maybe.
Yes.
I don't know if you like the full story here, but I think that other than the natural elements, there's few things in the world today that we touch that are not designed.
Right.
And even some natural things are being redesigned as we get into pretty advanced technologies and things. But it's not just the products that influence our lives. It actually influences the way we live, the behavior, our environment that we live in, certainly products and services that we exchange, as well as the forms in which we communicate. So in a way, any successful living is important. If successful living is important, then certainly design is important. Fundamentally, I guess it's also about change. Most people don't see design as change, and therefore maybe it's perceived as somehow relatively safer. But ultimately, at its best, design is reflecting the challenges that we have in the times that we're living, right. And ideally, good design improves upon those things.
I want to talk about your latest book, Return on Experience. Can you share this with our listeners and what the book is about? And that's a very intriguing topic as well. So.
Yeah, so I've been working on it a bit too long. I think probably it's been a while. I'm a designer, not a writer, so putting it together has taken a lot more effort. But I think what it starts out to do is explain maybe the approach that we use as a company to think about design, and how a focus on creating human experience is at the core of any successful design. And so the book touches on a number of different points, within each chapter. I include, examples of work as well to support kind of the argument or the statement for each chapter. But it's written in a narrative form. I think fundamentally design is about a conversation, that we're having a conversation with our present environment, our present conditions. We're also having a conversation with our past. And ultimately, that's something that is much more of a dialogue kind of conversation than, say, a monologue. So, we tend to think of designers as having high-level, elevated, special quality. I think today the world is far more complex for that old model to actually be relevant. And I think that we tend to need to work in ways that are can be large or small sort of ecosystems, but people who can collaborate and work together bring different insights to a problem. And in most cases, the problems are more complex than thinking of design purely as a form statement, but it has to have more impact and more meaning. And I think that comes from collaborative effort rather than an individual's kind of single vision. What else can I say? I guess the book itself is structured, as I said, in a question and answer. I also have Professor Roger Lehman, who is a professor in psychology, who writes a consistent thread through this as to why the approach tends to resonate with people. That there's fundamentally a psychological, biological thread that experience gives us. Marshall McLuhan talked about, a lot of people spend time communicating information. Unfortunately, information doesn't drive behavior. What drives behavior is experience. And so if you're focused on, purely conveying that information, you may be losing the opportunity. But Roger is a co-author, runs the thread through the entire book to help kind of give it context as to the why some of these principles may be applicable, may be successful.
And when is the book expected to be out?
Yeah, we're hoping this fall. We're supposed to have it out Q1, Q2 of this year. Of course, COVID was impacting that. So we're still working with the publishers, and it will be published in English and Chinese, and someone has reached out as well to approach me about publishing it in Spain, so that we have a Spanish language version of it as well. So it's getting nice traction.
Awesome. Awesome. I will come back to experience later in our talk. I want to now go to the one thing that excited you, excites me, and excites a lot of people, the Apple story. Tim, your experience, and we really want to hear your experience on building the first Apple store. Tell us all about it.
So we were very fortunate when Steve Jobs came back to Apple in 97, 98, in that time frame. We were hired to help him launch his first new product line, and that was the colored iMacs. And so our job was essentially to create the physical event that launched that product. I had written a year or so previously, I'd written a white paper on why Apple should do their own retail program. And it was because we had experience with both Nike and the North Face, where companies that were previously manufacturers were moving to controlling their own channel, controlling their own relationship. A lot of times Apple would do a great ad campaign. They would drive people to a third-party reseller, and the guy in the store would counter-sell them on a cheaper model or a different unit. So Apple was doing sort of the heavy lifting and not getting the benefit of the sales conversion. So, we basically used the same rationale that the other bigger brands were using at that time, who were manufacturers, but looking to control the voice of their brand. He called us one day. He actually, his assistant called us and said that Steve wanted a credentials pitch on us doing retail. He was in his car. He would be there in 30 minutes. And so we basically had 30 minutes to prepare. He came and he looked at our previous work, and I was there with my business partner, Wilhelm, and he looked at it and he said, what would you say if I'm not that impressed? He said, none of this work looks like Apple, and so why should we hire you? And my partner was in shock at that moment, and I said, well, you should hire us because none of this looks like Apple. That what we did for Nike looks like Nike. What we do for the North Face looks like the North Face, and what we've been doing for Apple previously looks like Apple. So, he got up and he sort of took a pause at that point. He got up and shook hands with us, said, I don't know if you've done enough retail yet. And then went out the door, and we didn't know if that meant we were hired or we were not hired. But he called us the next day and said, "Come down, let's get started on the program." So that's how it began. Yeah, we started on a whiteboard with Steve and I and Wilhelm, and started diagramming what a retail experience could be.
Wow, fantastic! Your interactions with Steve, and he's somebody who's clearly and dearly, sorely missed. Some couple of examples of Steve and you together. Would you be willing to share?
Sure. We were extraordinarily lucky. We had no idea that at that time his time would be so short, of course.
Yeah.
And we all we knew was we were just working extremely hard with him. And I think that it was one of those things where you tended to learn something every day. And one of the things that I would take away from Steve's engagement is that many people would say that he's difficult to work with.
Right.
And I think that he was very short on patience when it came to people who he didn't feel were sort of doing their homework before they ever showed up to a conversation. Okay. But the real reason, I think a lot of it had to do with the way he was as a thinker. And I think that he was very strong in the analytical side, and he was very strong in the intuitive side. And so essentially he he wasn't heavily weighted one way or another, I would argue. And that made it really difficult for most people, because most people were weighted one way or the other.
Right.
And so if somebody came in with a response to something and here was a logic tree, he could look at the logic tree in a few seconds, find out if there was a bust or not. But if there wasn't a bust in that logic tree, then he would completely flip to the other side and look at it from an intuitive perspective. And if it didn't work on an intuitive level, he would send them back to start over. Now you can imagine somebody who's really good at logic being told it doesn't make sense because it doesn't feel right. Correct. And go back to the drawing board. That's a frustrating thing for people who have that mindset. And likewise on the intuitive side, right? If they can't process the logic. So I think he was brilliant because he had that both that logic side and intuition side, and was comfortable, intellectually moving from one side to the other. The other piece is, I think, one of the reasons he's sorely missed, and there are many reasons, but one of them is we really don't fully understand what technology is today. In most applications of it, people mistake a technological capability with technology. And Steve, growing up in the Valley and knowing Hewlett and Packard, if you've ever been to their headquarters back in those days, there would be rows and rows of tables with engineers frantically working on the next interesting technological achievement. And Hewlett and Packard would walk along behind them every day, look over their shoulder, ask them what they're working on, what they're thinking about. And it was up to those two to then take that technical capability and turn it into a human application. And technology is only when you have a technical capability combined with a human outcome. And I think that I think Steve learned that pretty early on. And one of the reasons he was so loved and in some cases so hated was that he required technology to serve people, and he felt the ultimate way to serve people was to develop something that actually had value to people, that this is how you create value, and that it wasn't just the kind of standard consumption cycle that we have today, where it's it may be iPhone 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, whatever, the number never stops. It was about what does it do for people, and if it has real value, you change, you impact something so that people find that it has an influence on the way they live. And I think that the technical capability gets often confused with technology. And I would argue, and I'm sure he would agree, that it's different.
Wow. Oh, quite a. I've heard. Obviously, you've read up and heard a lot of stories, but this one is really deep. So that really means people working with him have to be on their toes and absolutely abreast of everything.
Yeah. I mean that he was a challenge, right? Because he was very fast. And you might walk out of a room scratching your head going, either I should have thought of that, or that's absolute BS. But either way, later on you realize he was right. So it was an amazing thing. I mean, we met with him every week for 12 years. So
wow.
we saw the good, bad, and the ugly. And so it was really getting to understand his personality, understand how he worked. That question that he asked us when he hired us that day, it was common for him to meet somebody and the first thing that he did would, push them in the chest and say, set them back on their heels and see how they stand up. And a lot of that was just testing the not waste time with people who couldn't go through the rigor that he was about to bring upon them. And so I think he was that clear on how he would work with people and what he could get from them, and when he was done with them, he would move on. And so a lot of people saw that as a little cold, but I think he did appreciate when we started working with him. The company was 200 people or something, so it's a much different animal today.
Right.
But he would keep around him people he thought would add to the conversation.
Oh,
And, in doing the retail program, we argued for an opening in the second floor of the Ginza store in Tokyo for many months, to the point where they had already started ordering the steel.
okay.
And Steve went around the room and asked everybody, we love the design, is it ready to go? And I brought up the point about opening the second floor so people could see that there was more floors to the Apple store in the building. And he went around the room and everybody said, no, 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 no. And he told us, you guys go back, you figure out how to get more product in if you open the hole in the floor, otherwise you're fired. And we said, okay, we'll go do that. And came back the next week, we raised the fixtures one row, and turned out we could get all the product and the hole in the floor. And so we went around the room. Everybody said, no, it's too late, blah, 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 blah. Steve said, no, we're gonna put a hole in the floor. And so this was after lobbying for it for a number of months. And when we walked out of the room, he came up behind me, put his arm on my shoulder, and said, "Hey, I just want to thank you for standing up for what you believed was the right thing to do." Now, whether he was happy about that behavior, or whether he was happy that we had solved the problem, or what, I don't know. But I think that he wanted people around him who weren't just going to tell him what he wanted to hear. But if you wanted to disagree, you better have a good reason. And so, that was sort of our existence with Steve.
Yeah, that's incredible leadership as well, right? Clearly.
Yeah. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah. All right, good. This question I'm asking would probably have been, the answer would have been a little different a couple of months back, or maybe 3 months back, but notwithstanding the C-19 that has hit all of us. Your take on retail, Tim, and your prediction. And you can give us both post-COVID and what you thought it would be.
Well, I think COVID is just, in a lot of ways, accelerations. So everybody talks about the things that are going on. We, just seeing it as accelerating what was already happening. And I think that, what's happening in COVID relative to retail is that we're seeing a rapid convergence of both physical and digital space. And we're working on engagements that actually bring those two things together. Nike has just announced that their projections for e-commerce are increasing substantially. They've already met the projections they had for 2025.
Wow.
They've already met them this year. But there's the idea that we're in an age where the rate of change is starting to outpace our ability to comprehend it and respond to it. The Moore's Law influence here that Thomas Friedman talks about is starting, we're starting to become somewhat, incapable of processing rate of change. And so what it means is we have to start looking, I think, at targets that are out there that are maybe riskier bets, but that look at it, not just what's going to happen next year in the next 5 years, but let's project out there at least 5 years and try to imagine the most extreme thing, and it's probably going to happen to us in a year and a half. So I think that notion of setting targets that because we have to recognize the rate of change is going to be continue to be rapid, and take into account how that affects our planet, how that affects people's lives, our perceptions of the markets. I think you see nationalist politics rising in many countries because of our inability to deal with change. We want to blame somebody else, when in fact it's the world is changing around us, and it's terrifying to people. It's something that we need to recognize and address if we want to have some stability. Otherwise, it'll be an age of conflict rather than an age of change.
Okay. And do you see the brick and mortar again becoming big, Tim, or do you see that fading away?
I think if you look at the U.S., there's something like almost 25 square feet of retail per person per capita in America. The next closest one, I think, is Japan, at 7, if I remember right. I think Singapore's around 4 or 5. I think most countries are in the 4 and 5 range. Maybe I'm mixing Japan and Singapore, but the point is that we've overbuilt a lot of retail in a lot of places, because once we've turned it into a formula, we can overbuild. And the reality is there's no need for a lot of that. And when you're 5 times the next closest country, you should probably question it's not the validity of the system, it's the oversaturation, just like you're overproducing anything. So I think that's one situation. But I do believe that there's a role for bricks and mortar and digital that brings those things together. Any pure play today, I think, is at risk. A pure play being either bricks and mortar or e-commerce. Both of those, the fact that you can touch and feel a product is hard to deny. That has more ability to connect you with brands and products than something you find online. But somebody who has just bricks and mortar and doesn't have a digital way to expand that capability, that's where I think you're leaving experience on the table that would be positive and drive deeper relationships with people. So I think they come together. We call it mono-channel retail. Everybody talks about these different channels. We think it's all one channel today. There's very few times where you'll meet a person face to face physically and they don't have a device around them digitally. And I think we've learned in the COVID era that just having Zoom calls with everybody is still leaving us a bit unsatisfied. We tend to miss each other.
Yes.
We miss the energy.
Yes.
You start to lose the passion behind what you're doing.
Absolutely.
So I think it's this bringing together of technology is just an enabler in the same way that architecture is an enabler.
Right.
And what you're doing is you're really building a relationship as a brand and a consumer. You're building a relationship and maintaining that relationship, and people are going to become used to, particularly when you look at digital native generation, more used to that. They don't see technology as interesting. Most of us from millennials and older remember a pre-iPhone and a post-iPhone world. Yes. They don't.
Correct.
All they've ever seen it is with technology. So it's about as thrilling as oxygen. They don't care except when they don't have it. And so, I think that's the kind of world we're going to be living in, is that perception is just going to be a given, and that virtually everything we engage with will have some form of technological interface, but it's just going to enable a better experience and a better outcome for people if it's well done.
True. Yeah, true. And I also believe, going back to your technology story, I also believe that large brands or organizations are now working on getting the digital experience as close to the physical one as possible. And that's the other gap that they need.
Yeah, I think you have the ability to do lots of things. The problem is we just haven't really looked at. We've been designing them in silos.
Correct.
And we're trained and we think in silos. The problem is experience is lateral. We tend to run across different disciplines in human interaction. And so I think the people who crack that are going to have a huge competitive advantage in the future.
You have worked, Tim, with some of the best marquee or the top marquee brands globally. What would you describe is the one common thread that runs across, if not all, at least most of them?
One of the most common, I guess, consistent traits that I see in really leaders that people, they hold up, whether it's Steve Jobs, whether it's Richard Branson, whoever it may be, they hold them up as leaders. A big part of the thing that makes them successful is that they're looking at what does their product do for people. And I think it comes down to it's not how do I make this object and then do a slight variation on it for the next number of years until people get completely sick and tired of it. They look at it and the reason they're remembered is because they have impact on your life. What Richard Branson did in terms of the kind of change that he had, in the airline industry or other sectors, they tend to want to improve the human condition, and I think that's probably the most common thread. I think it's not. A lot of people think value creation is financial, and value creation is ultimately human, and it converts through finance. But you're ultimately, if you're creating value, if you're driving loyalty, and you're connecting with companies at a deeper level, they forgive you when you make a mistake. Your conversion rates are higher. There's a number of different virtues that ladders into, and so I think the really great leaders are the ones who recognize what is value creation and then apply their decision making around that.
Coming back to your baby 8 INC, I'm very intrigued by the name. So,
well, eight was when we started the company. My business partner and I did what most companies do, and we put our name in the title. The problem is both of us had very difficult names to pronounce. And so, it was the worst branding decision that we could have made. And because she was from Asia, she was from Taiwan.
Okay.
She said, 8 is an auspicious number. It means good luck. I liked the sort of infinite aspect of it, that it's a continuous infinity thing, and the symmetry and some of those things. So I said, okay, we'll change the name to 8. And the next year we were hired by Steve Jobs and Richard Branson. So,
so it worked.
The idea that it had good feng shui was really at the heart of that. But our company, we say that we're a creative collective who believe that good design can create human progress, and we try to build it around those principles. And that means it's more of an organism than it is an organization. And again, when I talk about collaboration, I think it's a different structure in a way which makes it maybe less efficient to manage, but at the same time should produce more interesting outcomes than a rigid structure system. We have, the studios are led by creative team members, so we don't necessarily have salespeople leading the organization, but we look at the people who are actually making the creative work, and we focus on outcomes that people have. Our what we call our value creation engine always starts with human outcome at the top of the ladder. That we then develop a strategy that delivers that outcome, and then we develop the tactics that deliver on the strategy to deliver on the outcomes. And so many times we'll get a call by a client and they'll say, oh, we saw this interesting way of doing something here or something interesting there, and they'll want us to try to emulate that, but they're really looking at the tactic. And they think if they do the same tactic as their peers, that they're going to end up with the same results. And we try to, reframe it and say, you focus on human outcomes, then strategy, then tactics. And let's put all the tactics in the tactics box at the bottom.
Yeah.
And if it makes sense to deliver on the strategy, then we'll use it. And if it doesn't, we won't. But I think that framework means we're focused on creating the highest value for people. And again, later on, the human outcomes ultimately translate to business outcomes. But most of the time, if we think we're hired to improve the economic outcome, it's harder to achieve than if we focus on the human outcome and let the economic parts follow. And it typically comes in at a compound value in terms.
Brilliant, very deep. And you've set me thinking. And my next question really is, you simplified it so very nicely, right? And you said, focus on human outcome. We don't see companies doing that. We don't see leaders doing that, Tim. What's the reason? Is that the race for the quarter-on-quarter growth, or what is it?
It could be. I wouldn't argue that the corporate structure is really working to the best that it could today. That's not to say shareholders and that sort of system can't be valuable, but I think that we tend to lose sight of things, particularly if we are not looking at human outcome. It can be short term or long term, but if you commit to that, it should help you in either conditions. And I think that's, again, it goes back to thinking about what it is that you do for people, and recognize that's this is why people love you. This is why people connect with you. This is why people become advocates for your brand. And that's an incredibly powerful thing. And if you choose not to do that, people talk about word of mouth is so important. We know that something like 50% of word of mouth drives people's interest in engaging with a brand. But the research shows that 80% of word of mouth is driven by direct experience. So if you're not designing the experience, you're leaving money on the table. You're leaving opportunity on the table. And so I think that when you try to frame it into a business outcome perspective, obviously bottom line and quarterly results and all of those things are there. They're just much harder to achieve if you don't focus on the human outcome. Again, we in retail, we don't focus on getting more transactions. We focus on getting deeper relationships, and that leads to more transaction. It's a bit like that.
True, and I've seen it. Okay, I want to take you away a little bit, and maybe to the garden. If, Tim, you were not in design, what would you be doing, or where would you be?
The garden. Yeah, someone asked me this. I don't know, in an interview many years ago, and they said, I think it was in a workshop or something, and they said, what would you be doing if you weren't doing this today? Okay. And I said, well, yeah, I'd probably be gardening.
Wow.
And that was what I, my grandmother, I grew up with my grandmother, and she was a gardener. And what I think was important about that was I would be looking for some type of way to have continued lifelong learning. And she was probably the smartest person I knew. And I don't know if it was because she spent time in the garden thinking about things, and then she would go away and research or study or whatever it would take to understand it. But she spent some time, a certain degree of time, being contemplative about things. And to me, she instilled, every day that I came home from school, she'd stand there with her hands on her hips before I could get in the door and say, what did you learn today? And I had to come back and, remember A, what they taught me in school, and B, recount it to her. Beautiful. But she ingrained this thing of every day you're learning something. And if not, then you're kind of being lazy. Why aren't you? And so, that, I think that finding a role where you can continue to be a lifelong learner, to me, design is the perfect thing. We have a different problem every day. We have a different condition every day. I don't feel like I work. I feel like I do something that I enjoy. So it doesn't kind of come back to me as a labor, but it's something that I enjoy doing. And I think each day can be interesting and more fun if you take that approach, because I think we're all just learning as we go anyways.
Okay, I'll bring you back to the workplace now. Notre Dame, we are aware that you had proposed a completely out-of-the-box creative solution. Would you like to let us in on it, Tim?
Well, yeah, I don't know. It was just different than what we were seeing in the architectural competitions that were surrounding it. People were proposing all kinds of things. And, I get frustrated when designers put themselves ahead of the public, that Notre Dame in particular has an incredible historic value. Its proportions, its design was very well considered. And the tragedy of the fire meant that it would require something different. And I think that what we proposed was to rebuild Notre Dame identically to what it was from a form standpoint and from a visual detail standpoint. But we propose to do that new construction in glass, and the reason being to sort of not come and try to put our form imprint on changing what it was, but to respect what that was, and through this new material, give it the recognition of there was something lost in this fire, but it's lost but not forgotten. And I think it's kind of unfortunate to build it back kind of the way it was, because the old growth forests and things like that it took to create that, or it was built in a completely different time. But I think that it's somewhat, I don't know if pretentious or arrogant or whatever the word is, but for someone to come and try to put their own architectural language stamp on the form is I think unsettling. And to me, the idea of it being in glass, we know a lot about glass construction. We know how to do it in a way that would make sense. But the idea of that also addressed this point in its history. So people were putting swimming pools on the roof and parking lots and all kinds of crazy things, and we were just sort of frustrated that no one was actually respecting the fact that this is one of the prime examples of Gothic architecture. Absolutely. And that it has this prominent location and how it fits into people's lives in Paris, and in the world basically. And so anyway, we submitted that just as almost a comment on what everybody else was doing, but it turned out it got recognition. A lot of people reached out and responded to it, and I think we were in Time magazine and some other things. But anyway, it's gotten some visibility as a result, and I think if nothing else, it's again part of that dialogue. It's that dialogue that design has with everything that happens to us in our time.
I personally felt when I looked at that design that it definitely connected you and pushed you to think, oh, okay, this is how the Notre Dame looked like before, unfortunately, the fire ravaged it, right? So so that was brilliant. And a related question, Tim. So this was awesome what you created. And do you when you create such exquisite ideas, is there a separate zone or a space you get into, or does it come to you naturally?
I don't know. I think that people come to different solutions in different ways. The idea that you're continuously thinking about it, and if it's something that bothers you, that you continue to look at it. You look at it a different way. You look at it, upside down. You look at it sideways, but that you let that disturbance be a thing that drives you to keep pushing at it. And I think that when you find something that's creating some friction, that's probably the thing that you really need to focus on, because that's where you can have the most impact. And I guess I think you ultimately, I don't know that it's some divine kind of intervention or anything like that. I don't really think that it is, but I think that the idea that if you're someone who cares about something and you find that there's some point of friction and there's something you can do about it, then you should try to do something about it. And to me, that's kind of it's more of a compass kind of thing than a wait for something to happen that's not I think it takes work. I think it's actually hard to have that discipline and make the effort to try to solve it, and then be in a place to see if what you have really makes sense, right? Because as you move through life, you look back and you go, wow, I can't believe how stupid that was, the thing that you did 5 years ago or 10 years ago. So I think you have to have a certain degree of humility, a certain degree of a passion around what you're doing. And if that's the case, you can call it lots of things, but I think it ultimately produces the right kind of outcome.
You have accomplished so much, Tim. You have put out so much work out there that some of us just look at and marvel. Are there times when you sit with a cup of coffee or a drink and you say, there is something more I would like to do? Does that thought cross your mind? Or?
I guess so. I mean, I always think that there's more. The idea that if I were to spend time designing a chair right now, I don't know if that would be the best use of
Your time.
the amount of time I have left.
Actually.
And so we've tried to look at more and more complex problems, and to try to there's no shortage of problems in the world, and so I think as someone gets older and has had some experience, to go back and to do another Apple store isn't on my list of interesting things. Someone I was with a group of people, and they asked me if I had ever considered, or would I ever consider, designing a government, and they represented a small country. And they were going through significant change from the older generation to now this new and younger generation, and a younger generation of citizens.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was the most fascinating conversation, and the notion that we sort of look at these polarized conditions of we either have philosophy A or philosophy B. What if you were to redesign based on everything we know today? We know about all these different systems that have been, put out there. What if we took what we learned from that and started, with a fresh slate? And I just thought that was a fascinating design problem. Again, super complex and but potentially really really interesting. And then I was asked by the World Government Summit in Dubai, actually a couple of years ago, to go and speak at that, much more around kind of design philosophy and things like that. But to me, there's no. I thought it was incredibly thoughtful for these individuals to ask that question.
Yes.
I thought that was the most provocative question I had heard. So who knows? There's lots of complex things to work on, and I don't know what retirement is. So I think it's just a question of working on more and more complex, interesting things, and try to stay invigorated.
Can't agree with you more. I believe in it. Sustainability, Tim. Are people? I know there's a lot of stuff happening, but are people doing enough, or is it just still lip service? And globally, I'm talking.
Yeah, clearly we're not doing enough, and the lip service is it's important for people to speak out about it. I think that there are a number of sources around the world who are making a concerted effort to raise consciousness around that. And it's probably if you look at rate of change, if we're talking about this acceleration, there's Moore's law and there's the environment, and at some point our ability to correct the things that we're doing poorly to the environment, we won't have that opportunity anymore. And so I think it's it's fundamentally it's criminal, the companies or the individuals who don't promote a environmentally sustainable point of view, and that we all don't do everything that we can to ensure that we're aware of and focusing on the kinds of things that we can do through design to help mitigate that. I'm sure it's politically sensitive in lots of places, and some people think that it's something that you can believe in or not. I never believe science is something that's philosophical. But I think that it's the evidence is pretty clear, and denial is not the way to look at it.
Have you had a challenge like that, Tim, where your design and probably sustainability had to be balanced? And what route did you take? Did you face it?
Well, the thing is I know in design school, because I'm on the board at Art Center College of Design in Pasadena. Everyone talks about sustainability in the education, and designers get stymied because the answer, the best thing to do is to do nothing, because you ultimately, no matter what you do, you have some impact. But I think the part of this is that you recognize you have a part in this ecosystem, and that as a designer, you should be responsibly thinking for that. If you're looking at creating products and services that perpetuate consumption for the sake of consumption, then I think we're probably missing the point. And again, going back to human value and going back to sustainability, I think they're intrinsically linked, and you can't really separate them. And I think when Al Gore joined the board of Apple, and the idea that he convinced Steve to look at the packaging and to look at using the right aluminum, to get rid of heavy metals and all of these things. It wasn't something that the company could turn on a dime with.
Right.
But it's now moving more and more into a very as responsible a position that it can have in terms of using recycled materials, et cetera, the waste and the byproducts. All of those things are now part of the values that you associate with the company. Correct. And then people tend to vote based on the values company has. And if I'm consuming things from a company who doesn't have a concern for our mutual benefit, our mutual outcomes, then I can choose to be part of that value system or part of a different one. And as a customer, I think you should be engaging with and supporting those people who are trying to do as much as possible to be responsible to the environment.
Very true, very true, and I completely agree.
But this is coming from a guy from California too, so you might expect that response.
Yeah, no, but it is happening. I mean, hopefully, and this is where I go back to the younger generation of designers who are coming out. So if there is a consciousness, then probably over the next 5-10 years we will see shifts happening.
Yeah, I hope so. I think that has to be part of the program. It has to be part of what we put out there. I think a lot of those companies, I mean, we've seen less and less interest in somebody graduating from the college and then going to work in, say, the conventional work channels. There's a lot of people who are interested in coming out and doing something that makes them feel like they're contributing to change rather than perpetuating the norm.
Beautiful.
And it's now probably about 30% of the student body and growing.
Oh, beautiful.
So I think there is, with young people, there's light at the end of the tunnel, provided the system they come into have opportunities. It has to be solved relative to, are there careers and are there is there an economic system that supports that form of value creation?
Your message to the aspiring designers out there, Tim, few messages for them.
I guess, all design is about creating an outcome. And I think that it has to have purpose. Mm-hmm. The outcomes we create, whether they're large or small, change the way we live. If people are not, looking at who is it for and why is it important, then I think we're kind of losing sight of part of the problem that we should be solving for. And I think, there's always been this discussion around STEM and STEM versus STEAM, et cetera, and I was asked, I think by Georgetown University, asked me about why study the humanities? And I said, well, then why are we doing anything else? Why are we worrying about science and technology if not, for the humanities, if we're not thinking about ways of serving people in a better way? Right. And so I think it's designers' responsibility fundamentally to do that. And to make sure that the things that they're designing, the activities, the environments, all of these things are being looked at, not as a way to satisfy the designer's ego, but as a way to satisfy what value design can have in terms of, affecting the greater good. So I think those need to be what you aim for. You probably never get to achieve it, so it's also aiming for something that's very difficult. But if you don't aim for it, you don't get close, and it's much better to be close than not at all.
How would you like to be remembered as, Tim? 50
You
years
know,
from now.
you know something I don't. I think it's a tough question. I guess as someone who looked to improve things, to have some kind of impact. I think as designers we have that responsibility. If we don't do that, then we probably haven't done what we could do as well as we could. I'm not really interested in being famous and being some sort of somebody whose design is appreciated so much as did it have impact. I moved to Singapore to be at essentially the center. If we have 7 billion plus people on the planet, there's something like 5.5 billion within an 8-hour flight of Singapore. Yeah. So, between India with what is it, 1.4 and China with and China 1.6. I'm in a place where I think there's an opportunity to have the most impact for the most people. Beautiful. And the fact is that in that circle, most of the people are under 30 years old. So I think that's where really change occurs, and where the opportunity for impact is greatest. So that's why I'm sitting here.
That's a great point. That's an absolutely great point. That's true. Awesome. Tim, really, really fantastic. Can we, before we actually close, we're coming to the close, can we go over a few rapid fire questions? So, and your answers can be longish, but something that we do, right? Design compares to?
Compares to life, I guess. It's
wow.
It's I don't see it as being anything else. That's part of its responsibility.
Yeah. Awesome. Source of your inspiration?
My inspiration has been my family, both my grandparents and parents. My mother was probably the original hippie in Haight-Ashbury, and my father was the most pragmatic, practical guy you could imagine. And they sort of helped develop different ways of looking at things for me. But I also think my children, the inspiration, most people, initially are inspired by their parents, and then later they're inspired by their children. But I think, recognizing that obligations that we have, extend both ways. Other sources of inspiration, creatively, coming from California, growing up in California, I have an affinity to that area because I think from a creative standpoint, it's a place where opening your mind is more valuable than closing your mind.
Yeah.
And to me, it's a pretty cool place. Source of inspiration, my life experience. I've traveled a lot, all over the world. I've seen, as much as I can, try to take in experiences in different places, understand different cultures. I think it's opened up my mind to diversity of people and thought and philosophy and those things. I think that's essential as a designer. And then other people who have done work that you can admire. I think the Eames office in California was a fantastic studio for a time that created some phenomenal work. So I guess those are where you come from, where you go,
right.
your family and your world. I think those are I don't know. It's maybe it's not a clear enough answer, but those are the things that I guess inspire me.
True. Beautiful. If Tim were a student today,
If I were a student today,
Yeah.
I guess I would start down a similar path. Obviously, appreciation for the humanities in whatever form, whether that's art or poetry or painting. You know, I mean, it can be lots of things. I started out because I love to draw things. My mother encouraged me to do that at the chagrin of my father, who wanted me to work on calculus and things. But I think that I would start with an appreciation there, because it helps to shape some of the dogmatic things.
One book you would recommend?
Oh, there's lots of great books out there. What I'm reading right now, just finishing, is I mentioned Thomas Friedman. His book is his latest one is called "Thank You for Being Late," and
okay.
He talks about this kind of age of acceleration, exponential change. He talks about the kinds of things that impacted us in 2007, which he refers to as a pretty remarkable year, when many of the technology companies were formed and iPhone and stuff came to be. And anyway, but he puts the summary of this into the idea that a lot of our future success is built around our small communities. That it's not the super companies or the super nations and things, but if you look at where the successes are, it's in recognizing that we have a role in ourself, our family, and our community. And I think he builds a good case for why we should be optimistic. And I think that's one of the interesting parts of the book is, he looks at it from an optimistic perspective.
Beautiful. That's good. Awesome. That was really, Tim, my last question for you. With that, I would really like to thank you for coming to the studios, Tim. And it has indeed been a very invigorating and insightful discussion. Loved your take on design and the ultimate outcome. We are looking forward to a very bright future, and it's people like you who will make the planet a better place and use a design to bring about that meaningful change that we also desperately need in today's age and time. Design has certainly taken a new meaning for all of us. Would you like to say something to the listeners before we sign off, Tim?
No. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about these things. I think we need more questions and more conversation. I think bringing these ideas and having it be a dialogue is critical for success. So hopefully it can either be part of that dialogue or contribute to the next conversation. But thank you for putting these together and inviting me.
Thank you very much.